Hey everyone! This video requires a bit of an explanation. Late 2020 was a difficult time for me, but back in November I was still trying to push out videos at my normal rate. I recorded a video about my experiences with early transition steps. At the time I thought I did a great job, but it turns out that the footage was less than stellar. Presumably because I recorded a few days after surgery and I was still out of it at the time. I was not as cohesive as I usually am, but I also experienced several technical issues that I could not address. Creating the type of content that I do requires several technical steps. Ultimately, the footage I recorded could not be used in the way that I intended. That is why I recorded this new little intro and explanation. The topics covered by this video are important and they have been repeatedly requested. I do not want to redo this video from scratch, so I've done my best to salvage the footage. This resource is now available for the people who need it, and I hope that it turns out to be useful. When I first realized I was trans, my main information source were these retro-looking websites. I try to get more contemporary information from local health authorities, but honestly there wasn't very much out there. Even in places where presumably they were offering trans-related services, the people I spoke to didn't know what I was talking about, so I kinda had to piece things together on my own. My first priority was securing a diagnosis that I was trans. I was seeing a therapist at the time, but he was unable to provide me with a diagnosis. He actually wasn't very helpful for my gender-related issues in general. And because of how intertwined my mental health issues were with my gender dysphoria, I ended up needing to stop seeing him at a certain point. So I started looking for psychologists in my area and I found someone. The thing about therapy, especially for trans people, but also just in general, is that you want to be upfront in what your goals are and establish some kind of timeline. In my case, there wasn't any ambiguity for me that I was trans. So I just attended for 2 appointments and then I got a letter with a diagnosis. But I've heard plenty of stories where people would go to see a specialist and they would just keep delaying the diagnosis to postpone how long they would need to keep attending for. Whether it's because of gatekeeping or because of greed, it's just really awful in general, and definitely that's something that you want to watch out for. This is especially important for people who are uninsured. So like in my case as a Canadian, my mental health stuff was never covered by the government. And even though I had extended health insurance, it just doesn't pay for very much. I mean, this is the same insurance plan that paid me $50 for each of the surgeries I had these last couple of months. My psychologist right off the bat knew an endocrinologist who would be able to treat me, so the letter specifically requested that I am referred to that specific endocrinologist. So I took the letter to a walk-in clinic. I didn't have a family doctor at the time. And honestly, it's actually pretty difficult to get a family doctor in Canada nowadays. Depending on where you live, you don't necessarily need to go see an endocrinologist in order to get hormone prescriptions. But in my case, it was my best option because I didn't have like a lot of health resources, so I didn't have that option to affirming care. Even if you live in an area where general practitioners are allowed to prescribe hormones to you, they are not necessarily going to be comfortable doing so. It took about 3 months from the time of referral until I got the first appointment. I started off with the classic feminizing hormones treatment, so spironolactone for blocking testosterone, and estradiol for increasing estrogen. I know there are other options out there, but what I have right now works for me, and I don't experience any serious side effects. I started off on a low dose for the first 3 months, and then I had another appointment. This is pretty common, and it's to make sure that the body doesn't have any weird reactions to the medication. This dosage was not enough to really make a difference in my body, but the medication did substantially improve my mental state. Maybe it was just a placebo effect, but regardless, I was happy on hormones. At the 3 months appointment, I got my dosage raised to what should be the correct amount. But 6 months later, the blood test showed that my testosterone was too high and my estrogen was too low. So the endocrinologist increased my dosage of estradiol and also added progesterone. I take the artificial one, not the bioidentical one, but it still was enough to get my hormones to the correct level. After a while, appointment times increased from 6 months apart to 1 year apart. And once I got a gender-affirming primary care physician, I switched over to her instead of going to see the endocrinologist. The endocrinology appointments were covered by the government, but the referral process is tedious and unnecessary in my case. For the first half year, I didn't really look very different from how I was before hormones. But after like a year on hormones, the changes started to be more noticeable. Also, I did not start presenting as my gender until over 6 months on hormones. The idea of presenting as my gender was quite scary to me, and I felt like my family was not very comfortable with it. Even the second year on hormones, I didn't really feel comfortable with myself and my body. It took several years longer until I really started to feel comfortable with myself. In contrast to how my pre-transition self was very much just a persona that I was expected to maintain. And honestly, having a partner really helped me become comfortable in my own skin. When I first started transition, I thought like, oh, for sure, I would absolutely 100% want vaginoplasty. But once I met Rob, who loves me for who I am and for how I am and what I am, surgery became a much lower priority for me. Actually, I have not had any gender-affirming surgeries. I do not know what I want yet, and I do not need to make any decision yet. I want to get the rest of my life sorted out first. However, hormones don't magically fix all your problems. It resolved the depression-like symptoms I was getting from my gender dysphoria, but it didn't resolve things like my anxiety and my trauma. However, I absolutely do not believe that you need to resolve those things before you start transition. If you try to resolve your non-gender related health issues without treating your gender dysphoria, it's going to be a lot harder. Another thing that hormones does not help with is voice feminization. So that is one thing that you can work on before you start taking hormones. There are a lot of nuances about having a feminized voice, and I just completely ignored all of it except for pitch. That's all I worked on. I just worked on my pitch. I found that there were speech specialists who can sort of like help you train your voice, but these were like super booked up in advance, so I didn't feel like it was worth it for me. If you need to raise your pitch, you need to sort of raise your Adam's apple like higher up your throat. Don't physically hold it up with your fingers because you're going to hurt yourself that way. You sort of need to train yourself to do that naturally with your own throat when you talk. So what I would do is sort of like practice reading things off and practice common expressions like, hey, how are you doing today? Hi, this is Stephanie speaking. And then I would also like read off paragraphs just to practice pronunciating things that way. I did not have a very deep voice to begin with, so this training was fairly straightforward for me. Though when I first started off, I would still make mistakes in some cases, especially when I got caught off guard. In more extreme cases, you may need to look into like voice feminization surgery, which is absolutely an option, an expensive option if you really can't get that pitch that you want, and you want that pitch enough to get surgery for it. Feminizing hormone replacement therapy will also have little to no impact on your body hair and facial hair. I've personally done a combination of laser hair removal and electrolysis. Ideally, you want to find an experienced technician with good bedside manner and preferably someone with experience treating trans people. It took me 2 times to find a technician I was happy with. The first time I tried electrolysis, I could not complete the session, and I knew that I would not be able to continue going there. Thankfully, I found a new clinic after that. My takeaway for this video would be that transition is a marathon, not a sprint. You can go at your own pace, and there is no one right way that you have to do things. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Have a good week, everyone. Bye!